Building a great B2B go-to-market engine starts with understanding what actually works and evolving it. I'm your host, Rob Carroll, and this is a go-to-market perspective, where marketing and sales leaders share what really works, foundational best practices, smart trade-offs, and practical AI you can actually use. AI has broken the pricing playbooks most B2B companies still rely on. Seat-based pricing is straining, usage models are confusing buyers, and leadership teams are asking pricing teams to move faster with less certainty than ever before. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Ismail Madni to unpack what's actually working, what's not, and how pricing teams are adapting in real time. We worked together at Okta a number of years ago, and he's been killing it in the pricing and packaging world ever since. And I'm really excited to dive in to what's the latest and greatest in pricing and packaging, and more in particular with AI hitting mainstream. How are we pricing for AI? And how is AI changing the processes of pricing and packaging? That's a mouthful. Welcome.
Thank you, Rob. I am very excited to be here, very excited what you're doing. And for those watching, listening, I had a great opportunity to work with Rob years ago at Okta during the peak of the pandemic, which was just a very interesting experience, I think, for everyone. Really enjoyed it, and thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. And I think you started with a couple of things here that I hear constantly and that I talk about in various talks I give. Number one, more art than science. I think that's a fair statement for those who are not day-to-day practitioners. Number two, the big, kind of sexy discussion we've all been having in the community is AI pricing. How do you monetize AI? What has changed, not just in terms of strategy and the outcome, as we all know about, but also how you get there, how the process actually works now. Where do you even report? I think those are things that are fundamentally different today than 3 to 4 years ago. So a lot there that we can really jump.
I think it's going to be a cool conversation because it has evolved, and evolving implying it ever was mature in the first place. And I say art and science, and I probably should throw magic in there too because of
There's a friend of mine in Austin he's a founder of a company that many people here have heard of, and a good friend of mine. He calls it the black art. It's not really the black art, but that's his take on what we do.
That's perfect. Well, let's get started by just sharing a little bit about yourself, kind of a little bit about your background, what got you into the pricing and packaging, a little bit on your journey. And then obviously I'd love to hear what's happening today at Mimecast.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's, I think like many folks who do what I do, and we've all become friends over the years and are connected, you accidentally fall into this role. It's something you learn in business school. If you get a marketing degree, one of the 4 Ps, but I have not met anyone who has gone into the working world or joined a tech company saying, I want to set price for a living. I want to package for a living. And somehow here I am, having done it in SaaS tech AI for 12 years now. And before that, another 7, 8 years in government contracting. But like many others, I accidentally fell into it. When I moved to Raleigh after I got married, I needed a new job, and the Citrix Go-To products had built this fabulous office. I got to work at Citrix ShareFile. It's just incredible way to enter the tech world. Interesting product, great people. Got a sense of a PLG motion, a sales-led motion, an enterprise motion. Through that journey, I got to work on products like LastPass, GoToMeeting, GoToAssist. And I'd like to say that's where I really learned the ropes. I learned the ins and outs of that process you talked about, and where I developed my process centered around customer research and really understanding what drives customer value. How do you tie that to your discounting strategy? How do you model out what's going to happen? How do you bring all these people together at the intersection of product, sales, finance, marketing, What's the story for product marketing? So there's just so much I learned there. I then went on what has turned into my niche almost, which is being pricing strategy hire number one at a variety of companies, including Okta. When before you and I arrived, there was no pricing function. There were people who did pricing, but there was no one dedicated to pricing. So I think it's actually really cool to be, at that company, being the first one to build out a function. Moved on from there, did some consulting, and then Mimecast called me via their private equity owners who were very interested in a pricing function and the pricing discipline, and they view it as a growth lever, and had me establish the pricing function here at Mimecast. So I'm now about 3.5 years in at Mimecast, and you know, today we're recording this, and it's been just a really interesting journey. And of course, you add in the AI element, that's just thrown something else into the mix.
I bet. And so, so being kind of the first full time pricing packaging guy for a lot of these orgs, what what would be your summary of what that process looked like before it became a dedicated discipline within each org?
In every single org, and this is at very different scales, by the way. I've been at a startup that was what, not even 25 million in ARR, another startup that had just gotten past 50 million but was very founder led. Of course, Okta, which when I got there was about 600 million ARR, so much more mature company, and now the private equity owned piece as well. So very different, but at the same time, very similar. I think, again, this is something we talk about in the community quite a bit, establishing credibility with this is how I do my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go through the interview process, and there's one executive who really wants you. There may be another who doesn't, whatever, right? But really establishing yourself as you have a methodology, you have a process, you have a way of working. It's a muscle that you have to constantly work, similar to product or product marketing or sales. There are methodologies and science. One of the first things I've always done is meet with the key executives and
Mm-hmm.
tell them, this is how I do things. And this is how I'm going to work with you in accomplishing customer research or modeling or figuring out what seller input, whatever aspect of it is. And then I can identify problems and go from there. But I think that first, this is how we do things is very important.
Yeah, and I think that would be really, because I'm sure there's a lot of young children out there today thinking of a career in pricing and packaging. So I think let's, but seriously, there may in fact be a number of folks in product marketing or product management or other roles that are actually really curious about this skill. So I'd love to just ask, before we get into AI and all the disruption that's going on in the world, and we'll get there, but what is pricing accountable for today? Is it all about growing the revenue? Is it about product adoption, or is it about EBITDA? Of course it's about EBITDA for private equity, but what are the key metrics of
Mm-hmm.
success? And really, what are you, when someone decides to invest in this discipline as like a full-time role, what is usually the catalyst? What's driving that investment?
Yeah, I think great questions there. It's one of my favorite ones because it's an odd thing to say, but it depends on each company. But
Mhm.
fundamentally, it is, and there's a great book that I'm about to quote the title of. It is monetizing innovation. How do we monetize this great product we have built? How do we ensure that we as a business are getting the value that we are providing to our customers, because we're solving jobs for them. We're getting jobs done for them. We're solving problems for them. Let's not either give it away, or let's make sure we actually have a compelling offering that matches what they want. So fundamentally, it is a top line growth. It's
Mhm.
any interview I go through, like, boy, this is a really important role for us, and we believe it's an important growth lever. That's a very common thing. Is how do we have a step function increase in our top line growth over the last 3 years, Rob? Though, especially the last year and a half, not just top line growth, because there's ways you can do that via either price increases or packaging changes. And I prefer the latter, packaging changes and providing more value.
Mm-hmm.
But now it is that bottom line EBITDA. Are we not killing our gross margins? Are we ensuring that we're not only covering our COGS, but meeting those goals as well? So for a long time, Rob, it really was centered around monetizing either the user base or monetizing this great product. A lot of how do we get free users to pay for us, right? That was the
Mm-hmm.
question of the 20 teens when PLG was really big and you had
Right.
hundreds of thousands of free users. That's a top line growth question. Now you
Mm-hmm.
still have to solve for the top line, but I really believe we're going to be talking about the bottom line, not just EBITDA margin, but margin dollars. Can you grow our margin dollars at a step function rate via pricing and packaging?
Right, and I think you bring up like a really interesting point because there's always going to be this tension between you could price whatever you price, but that's the whatever list price that you recommend and whatever packaging you recommend, there's a sales process and a negotiation process that happens. And suddenly, like I've had a lot of experience with this in my career where we put a whole lot of effort into defining pricing, but discounting is the Wild West. And so suddenly your price is kind of becomes irrelevant if the
Mm-hmm.
discounting discipline on the CRO and finance side doesn't match up. How do you, as you're doing your work, how do you normalize and make sure that the whatever the goal is for the company, whether it is top line growth, whether it's EBITDA, whether it's customer adoption and or expansion, what's your process to ensure
Mm-hmm.
that you're not just pricing in a vacuum and then all hell breaks loose when it actually
Oh
gets out
yeah,
into the
and
field and into
it's another great question and it's a real challenge, right? No matter, even the best struggle with this because end of quarter we got to hit this number, whatever price to win the deal. Like all discipline goes out the window, right? that's
right.
that's your classic example. End of fiscal year, we're so close to hitting our number. I can do this if you give me this exception or that exception. So over the years, I've tried it different ways. And what I've found works, Rob, is having those cross functional stakeholders that are involved in not just setting the number or the package or whatever, but will actually be on a Tuesday afternoon at 11:43 a.m. on the phone with the prospect on January 31st trying to close a deal, have them involved through the process. So my process really is focused on fundamentally what is our goal as a business with this pricing change or packaging change, whatever it may be. And let's just say
Mhm.
AI monetization, because that's the hot topic. Let's get some seller input. Let's get customer success input. Let's talk to our product marketing team, get some competitive intel. Let's talk to our product team as well, understand the mission and goal of the product itself and what they're building. And then let's go out and talk to customers. Most importantly, let's do our surveys where there's a variety of techniques that you can understand packaging preferences and user needs and user preferences. There's ways to figure out willingness to pay. Using that fundamental data and then modeling it out with your finance team gives you the confidence and a real baseline of this is the price we should expect once the deal has closed. This is what an end user is willing to pay for this offering that we have that solves a problem or gets a job to be done. With that information, Rob, we can then almost work backwards in a way because discounting also depends what type of business you're in. Are you enterprise going through a channel? Well, you have to take your list price into account with the channel dynamics. Are you self service, online, credit card? Very different things. So, really understanding those dynamics, but fundamentally, it comes down to what is the problem to solve or job to be done, segment out by that, have an offering that solves that problem or gets that job done at a price the end user is willing to pay.
I don't
Answer
know.
will
No,
be
that's way too practical for me. Where's the gut feel? Where's the customers don't know they need this yet?
Right, right, yeah, no, and it's all great points that you have there, but I fundamentally I believe in the basics, and especially in the world of AI, the as it gets more complicated and as you have to move faster, if you keep doing those fundamentals and really understand that, makes it easier to set a list price. It makes it easier to give discount guidance. At Mimecast, for example, we've been doing all sorts of fun things, including getting our customer base onto the best of Mimecast to make sure they are
Mhm.
protected. I've spent a lot of time with our product marketing and enablement teams making sure that we arm the field with when do you start the conversations? Because we're going to ask for more budget. What are your levers to ensure that we actually grow the account but don't make them mad? And what are the backup plays? So, as many rigid rules, believe it or not, as many rigid rules as you can define, the clarity, and so long as you compensate the right way, the sellers will go along with it.
Right. So I've got just a question and then a provocative question. So first of all, just org wise, at Mimecast, where are you reporting up through? Like what part of the organization?
Mhm. Today, I'm in the finance org. And if I had gotten a call from Mimecast 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, whenever it was, and they said, you'll report into finance, I would have laughed. I would have been like, no way. Ha. This is not the right place to be.
Hmm.
Today, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I'm very lucky to have a CFO who's very supportive of what we do.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. And I've had some fun conversations. When I wrote an article on pricing, a year or so ago, I talked to a friend of mine who's a CRO, and I made
Mm-hmm.
the statements like, yeah, sales should never own pricing, and you know, in his perspective, which I appreciated and don't disagree with, is stereotypically, maybe that's true, but shouldn't pricing be owned by people who understand pricing no matter where they live? And I thought, okay, that was a good point. It's often not in sales.
Right.
But to your point, if you have a CFO that truly understands how to do this on behalf of the business, it's not purely a financial
Right.
decision, but it's a strategic go to market decision.
Mm-hmm.
It, who understands pricing is the best answer. But here's the provocative question: if and when pricing fails, and of course not limited to Mimecast, based on all your experiences and all your peers in the space, if and when pricing fails, where does it usually fail first? So is it in just the overall strategy in terms of defining where and how you should be pricing? Is it on execution, things like the discounting we talked about? Is it on governance that there's just not enough oversight and consistency? Or, to your point, it's maybe there's a completely separate set of prices through the channel or through the
Mm-hmm.
marketplace versus through direct, and that creates churn. So I'm giving a whole bunch of examples of where things may fail, but I'm just kind of curious in your experience, you know, where is it typically failing, and where would you say traditionally or typically in 2026 are the most logical places, 80/20 rule for pricing to report?
Yeah, so I think number one, where it fails, always, when you have an executive team that is misaligned on what they want out of pricing or what they want out of the offering. A great example is are you an a la carte business, or are you more of a like plan bundled package business, right? Do you sell a whole bunch of line items, or do you sell, maybe a good, better, best? There's pros and cons to each. The worst is when you're operating in both worlds because you have an executive team that cannot align, and
Mhm.
you as a pricing professional cannot get them aligned for whatever reason on the best approach. So number one, where it starts is executive misalignment, because then number two, it makes it impossible to execute on anything. Oh, this is the direction we're going, and no, actually don't do that, we need to do this. Or wait, we're going to lose these sets of customers, but hold on, we're optimizing for new business and acquiring customers, so there's of course going to be downsell. So when there's misalignment, and when there's misalignment on the potential trade-offs and risks of pricing decisions, it's we're not a panacea. We can't do it all as much as I wish I could, as much as some days feel I could. Like, gosh, if they only did exactly what I said, we grow the top line and the bottom line. That's impossible. So to me, failure comes from that executive misalignment because then you can't get the strategy. And maybe you can. Maybe you can get through a meeting and everyone on the executive team nods. But then when you go to execute, the back pocket veto shows up. Someone says, "Hey, what are we doing here?" Or we can't execute on that. Or there's a dozen problems. There's many reasons as to why you can't do something. So if there's alignment, then you just kind of plow through it. And that also impacts the governance because once again, if you have misalignment on the strategy, on the execution, you're going to have no governance. So that's where it fundamentally fails. And I have many examples of it going that direction, but I have examples the other way where when we have that alignment and when everyone is understanding what we're doing and supportive of it, oh man, it's so much fun to see what you can accomplish.
Yeah, and and it just in my experience, exactly what you're saying. When you actually, from a governance perspective, you got alignments. This is our pricing strategy, and then if there are exceptions, especially when you're dealing with complex enterprise sales or the law of large numbers, when you've got like a very large deal that you know what discount. At Informatica, there were some deals where if you just followed the pricing model. It kind of hockey sticked up. And
Mm-hmm.
so suddenly you'd be charging 40, $50 million for something
Right.
that, if you follow that hockey stick up, where of course you got to do like a 95,
Yep.
98%
Mm-hmm.
discount, but it's like SVP approval or
Mm-hmm.
CRO approval or CFO approval. In other words, just go through the steps to like, of course, because there are things depending on your levers and in your pricing model there are potential things that are outliers,
Absolutely.
and that's where governance comes in, right?
Exactly. And again, I think you brought up another example of a multi channel business and just the numerous conflicts that brings in, unless you have an executive team that is absolutely aligned on what you're prioritizing, what you're willing to give up, what is the purpose of each route to market. You may have value added resellers who you're giving a huge discount to because that's the way it works in your industry. So you want to do that, but it's potentially cannibalizing your legacy direct business. As an example, you're kind of growing up as a business. You have to go through channel and partners. That's just one example that comes to the top of my mind. And you execute on this, it's like, oh my gosh, we're losing, we're seeing downsell in our direct business. Why? Well, they're going to the channel. Well, how do we fix that? It's like, well, you can't,
Right.
because we made a decision as a business that we want to go through the channel. And there's a game, there's something you have to play there. So to me, as a pricing professional, it is very important that not only do we do the research around customer value and what they need and the willingness to pay, but also bring to light and surface these risks and pitfalls and really make executive teams, you know, have those trade-off discussions.
Yeah, and I imagine depending on the channel, it's like which one's the big fish, the your company or your channel partner. It's like
Right.
if you're like a market leading mega vendor, the channel has to bow to whoever the heck you want to price things. If you are a little fish and you're trying to get onto a big fish marketplace, think
Mm-hmm.
AWS or
Right.
anything like that, suddenly you're probably going to have to cater to what their expectations are in order to be eligible and to be promotable, et cetera. So
Right. Right.
there's obviously those factors you have to plug in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been over the years. I think, Rob, when we were at Okta, we were just really getting that channel program started there. It had been primarily a direct business. Remember our CRO at the time, he really wanted to start going through the channel more and more. So start to get involved in that. And then as I've learned more about it, it's like, oh yeah, there's so many dynamics here that as a pricing professional, we have to keep in mind versus when I was at more of, again, the Citrix Go 2 products were primarily self-service online or through direct sellers. We had a channel motion, and Citrix had a channel motion, but the go-to products, it wasn't nearly as much there. So I've really learned along the ways that not only do you have to do what I talked about, the customer research and understand value and willingness to pay and what they want, but then also what are the dynamics of your market, of your route to market, of your go to market engine, and how can pricing be an accelerant, more rocket fuel to that route to market versus something that just causes complexity and slows things down. It makes you hard to do business with.
Yeah, and before we're going to get into very soon into the new pricing models and the shifting pricing models and
Mhm.
AI and all of this. But before we do, um, my real question is, let's imagine there's a lot of folks listening here that maybe can't have a dedicated pricing function, or maybe can't even afford
Mhm.
deep market research. I've been fortunate in some of my roles to be able to bring in that pricing expert to be able to do that propensity to buy analysis, and to really understand what the triggers are and how you're perceived and value compared to your competitors. Those are wealthy budget type of projects, right? What are your recommendations, especially as you focus on kind of customer focused approach, which I believe makes all the sense in the world? What does that earlier stage company or that product marketer or product manager that's kind of on the hook for recommending pricing and packaging, that doesn't have necessarily the skills or the budget to do it, quote, quote, the ideal way?
Great. It's a great point you're making there, where so many, to your point, have those budgetary issues. I think number one is there's many resources out there. I think one of my favorite books is called Monetizing Innovation. It's written by partners who worked at Simon Kucher, great, pricing consultancy. They've written, what I consider, sort of the Bible of our profession and the how to do things. So, number one, there are many resources out there. Number two, no matter what role you are in, whether it's like you said, early stage founder, first product marketer, first product person, you're still talking and engaging with customers, and weaving into those discussions the willingness to pay and the feature preferences. You can do that and build a hypothesis. A lot of what we do is, Rob, is hypothesis driven, and
Mhm.
we have a strong belief in what we recommend and what we're going to do, but we really don't know till it hits the streets. And as I mentioned, it's Tuesday at 11:43, last day of the fiscal year. What is really happening? So fundamentally, there are easy ways to do it. Via looking at the many resources now online, weaving that into your pricing conversations, and then just executing and trying something. And then I'll add one more point. All of us in the pricing profession, we love to geek out on this. So if you reach out to any of us on LinkedIn for a
Mhm.
30-minute chat, I promise you we will talk to you, because we just love this. We feel, oh my gosh, someone respects what we do. So lastly, if you wish to reach out to us.
No, that which is awesome, and I definitely encourage everyone for every discipline when we're talking about go to market strategy and all the things that I'm excited to be talking about on this podcast. The whole point of this is introducing people to experts in different disciplines so they can actually maybe make some of these connections. So let's go into some of the fun, juicy center here, which is pricing models. So I've been around, in the earlier days of software, 20 plus years ago, it was all about perpetual license on
Mhm.
prem, paying maintenance as a separate annual fee. Then it went from capex to opex. So suddenly now
Mhm.
it's subscription based pricing, and things are now in the cloud. And suddenly you're you're managing things differently. You're embedding services and support into the subscription pricing, and now we're hearing all about, okay, well, it's no longer subscription, it's now consumption. And then for years everyone's talked about outcome-based models, but no one's
Mhm.
ever been able to crack that nut. Some have, but it's like it always seems to be hard to prove the value and actually price based on the value you're delivering when it might be indirect value. So
Mhm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the evolution of different pricing models. Where is, but I'm going to say very broadly and generically, where is B2B SaaS tech software? Like infrastructure, services, there's lots of different types of businesses, but let's just focus on software for now.
There are so many different ways we could go about it. And this is again the fun conversation that we're having on LinkedIn or in little meetups or text groups or whatever else. And I think fundamentally the one thing to say is it is moving very fast. When a company like Salesforce, that is huge and gigantic and a big shift, has made four changes to agent force pricing since launching it, what, less than 2 years ago?
Mhm.
That should tell you the speed of what is happening. So I think fundamentally, you need the pricing muscle because you need to be doing that research constantly and understanding your customer literally every day, because I feel like every day, Rob, things are changing on this front. Again, you mentioned a couple things, right? Up until 2021, 2022, predominantly in the SaaS world, per seat, very predictable, usage based pricing was definitely a thing. We had some element of it at Okta, certainly Auth0 did with the monthly active users. There's many examples of usage based pricing before the
Mhm.
advent of AI. Now, it's as you mentioned the magic word outcome based pricing. And, I jokingly like to say I coined that term at a conference 2 years ago in Austin, but I'm certain there are other folks talking about outcomes.
That's where a lot of value engineering teams are driven, and their post sale work to like prove the value that you're getting from our product so we could then charge you more.
Right. Yeah, well, and now it's really fascinating because you see an example like Intercom. Intercom's done a great job with Fin and the resolution based pricing for 99 cents. And what I love about it, and again, 2 years ago, I gave a talk on Fin when they came out with it is very clear. We resolved a customer support issue. This is the criteria for a resolution, 99 cents. And guess what? You don't need as many people in the support desk working on it, and there's a real saving. So we can quantify
Mhm.
the value you have quite easily, because number one, we know what a resolution is. Number two, you know how much it'll cost you per resolution. And number three, we can look at your support tickets before, etc., and give you the exact dollar amount. I think that is ideal state. Now, what happens is Zendesk comes along and is like, hey, yeah, well, we're going to do the same thing or something similar, but we're going to slightly redefine what a resolution is. It's not going to be the exact same thing as Intercom, and it'll be priced a little less. Like, oh gosh, okay. Like, what does that mean? Or Rob, I think in marketing and sales, generating leads, right? I feel there's so many AI BDR tools that are, charge per lead. We've always had charge per lead models, and
Mhm.
that's existed. But again, defining those leads. So you have that outcome element where I'll put it this way: I still want to see how this evolves, because I'll tell you this much: being in a finance org now and understanding what a pain it is to forecast what you're going to spend on a cursor or on, again, intercom or whatever else, when you get these variable costs beyond your AWS bill, is really tricky, because in theory, you should be seeing either savings or revenue growth, but it's not always obvious like it is with in AWS or Azure or whatever else, because those are real infrastructure. So I think what's exciting is it's moving fast.
Hmm.
There's a lot of experimentation. It's tricky. And I somewhat fundamentally think as the costs of LLMs go down and the models go down, that over time we will end up sort of back in that subscription world. People like predictability. People like simplicity. It just reduces that cognitive load, and there will be some element of that variable, but we'll see how much it is going forward.
No, it'll definitely be interesting. And back to customer first. So like, what are the customers willing to do?
Mhm.
And so let's get into, and forget about those that are actually building AI infrastructure, the LLMs or whatnot. We're talking about this the average software vendor, B2B software vendor that is delivering AI fueled capabilities, AI features. Forget the marketing of it, whether it's agentic workflows or autonomous agents or just a natural language interface or whatever. There's so many things that vendors are pushing as AI today. So the two questions that come to mind is one, how many of these features should just be provided as a differentiator and stop
Mhm.
charging for them versus
Mhm.
where does it make sense? Like, what are the decision points that you would consider to say, should we charge for this AI feature, or do we just make it as a expansion of your existing
Yeah,
offering?
no, it's again, it's the debate we have. My simple approach, sort of my heuristic, and my first principle is, if it directly drives revenue or it directly saves you money in cost. So again,
Mhm.
either the AWS model, which again in theory your AWS bill should align with revenue growth, or the Intercom Fin model where there's real savings that you can directly attribute. That's where it makes sense to have a usage consumption type model where you're providing very easy to quantify value that either is tied to revenue growth or tied to cost savings.
And that's really like the AWS model is more like it's utilization. It's purely focused on that. So whether the utilization is through some AI capabilities or any other services that you're offering, they're charging for utilization. So,
Right.
arguably, is it even an AI metric?
Yeah, it's a very good point you bring up there, right? It is utilization. If you are utilizing it, in theory, as a customer, you see value and you're willing to pay for that value because you're utilizing it. You're using a ton of it, right? You have a run rate, etc. Where it's tricky is when you aren't using it, or maybe there's a subset of people who do see value in what you're doing, but it's not obvious. It's not clear. And I think in those cases, you have two options where you either, to your point, you have it as part of your just core offering that, hey, there's AI capabilities in here. There's a company that does it's project management software. I'm a big fan of it, ClickUp. And they're really pushing AI capabilities into the platform. They've experimented with all sorts of interesting things, but have continued to realize the simpler we make it, the easier it is. Because, Rob, are you going to pay for, an AI workflow that alerts me that I'm 2 days behind, like clicking on something saying, clicking on my progress report or something? Probably not.
And do I care if it's an AI workflow or any other type of business process management workflow that alerts me? It's a simple notification, and the behind the scenes sausage making of how that notification happened is irrelevant to so many.
Exactly. I think that's fundamentally it. Like, oh, yeah, it's an agent doing this, saying that Ismail's behind on this project and alerting Rob and saying where the critical path is, etc. And both of us are like, that's really great, but if it's using an LLM or AI or whatever, like, I don't know. So to me, right now in the early days of this, again, the easy thing, if you really provide a quantifiable value on revenue or cost savings, go the usage model. Like you will do really great, and that is the best way to prove your value. If you don't, enhance your capabilities, enhance your offering, get your customers using it, figure out ways that the actual use cases and workflows that are there, that are real, that are actually AI driven,
Mhm.
and start to double down on that and investigate further.
Right, and that's to your earlier point where competitive intelligence comes in, and it's like,
Mhm.
are your competitors charging for it? And is it a differentiator that you could actually win more deals by not charging for it? And
Right.
it's like, what's the end goal? Short term, revenue bump from a feature, or long term winning logos and retention? So
Mhm.
again, these are all things that have to go into any strategy. It's not simply this is a cool feature, let's charge for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think everyone falls into the trap. And I think there's one industry where it's tricky. The industry you and I are very familiar with, cybersecurity, because fundamentally the value is protecting me, whether it's my identity or email or endpoints or you name what needs protection. The customer is buying in Okta, buying a Mimecast, or buying a CrowdStrike to be protected.
Yeah, don't charge me for the how, charge me for the risk you've mitigated.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's because we need those agentic AI workflows within cybersecurity. Just because, I mean, you're well aware of this. How many hacking attacks and phishing attacks, et cetera, are generated by AI now, right? So you almost have to fight it with AI. That costs money, but Microsoft, I think about a year and a half ago, came out with something called a security something unit. I don't remember it off the top of
Mm.
my head. I was like, that's interesting, for like their Defender products and E5, etc. And I thought, but I expect to be protected and defended if I'm using this tool, not, hey, I was attacked. There were 1,100 phishing attempts today, and I stopped all 1,100 of them. Pay me for that, right? So I think that's
Yeah,
where,
no, unless the AI feature is actually taking you into an adjacent use case or adjacent
right,
capability where it's something brand new that you couldn't get before, don't charge me for doing a better job of the thing I'm already paying you for.
right,
Is
right,
my general gut is, uh, I think you need to build a case to charge anything extra in this very crowded competitive AI
exactly.
um, chaos going on right now. Is give AI away for free as much as possible and win the market, and then you can worry about monetization later. That's my gut for many markets.
Yeah, and that is my gut in general as well, except again, today, and that's why I said being in finance actually makes more sense today. The costs and the cogs, and I actually saw an interesting LinkedIn post where the software world 10 years ago, the most expensive customer was the first one, and then you got economies of scale, and you're fattening up, from 0 to 100, 100 to 1,000, that cost curve
Mhm.
just like collapses. Whereas in AI, the more, usage is great. You want usage. That in theory should
Mhm.
tie to revenue, but every extra unit of usage, there isn't a marginal benefit. You are getting charged a token or whatever. There is an actual charge to that. And this post argued that software has gone away from being software and what made it so value. You're gonna I wonder what you think of this, to the restaurant industry where you have thin margins and it's competitive because just because you serve 10 dishes of salmon doesn't
Mhm.
mean that dish 9 was any cheaper to produce than dish 1. So I think that's really interesting in today's world, and especially with the real costs of running this to a business.
As we're kind of wrapping, let's focus on how are you and your team using AI to improve
Mhm.
the process of coming up with pricing and packaging recommendations and doing your analysis. So it's like the other side of the coin is like, how is AI influencing your day to day?
It's been wonderful in terms of giving us a head start on customer research, being able to move on that faster. So, for example, 5 years ago, I'd have to sit there and write out a survey by hand. Now I can actually go into whatever tool we're using, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, saying, "Hey, this is the survey I want to run with this type of user, this type of demographic, etc. This is what I'm trying to get out of it." And bam, it's like 90% there. And now I'm editing and the foundation is there. So just some of the basics I can move faster on versus when it would take weeks and weeks to actually come up with a survey instrument, for example. Now, of course, you have to edit it, check it. You just can't put that into Qualtrics, for example. So that's number one.
Mm.
Number two, the competitive research makes that much faster and quicker to do. And then number three, some of the analysis that you would do on your customer base or what if scenarios. I've been experimenting with Claude in the latest release they've made. It is really cool and really powerful. In my personal life, I use Gemini quite a bit, and that's become even more powerful from a data analytics standpoint. So, in those ways, we've been able to move faster with research and be able to move faster with some of the analysis we have to do.
That's cool. And I think, we can only imagine what's next. And that's what I'm going to ask you next is 3 to 5 years. What is this discipline going to look like? How much of it's going to be, let's use the word automate in finger quotes, but how much of pricing and packaging can be actually, you know, leverage AI to do the 80/20 rule, and which parts of it really are still going to require the human touch?
Yeah, no, it's what I think about quite a bit. I think the pricing analytics and the pricing analysis, the what happened with our discounting, our deals, what did our competitors do? Just really so much of our time gets spent, doing analysis on deal data or Salesforce data, whatever else. That'll be automated very quickly. I mean, I think even this year, by the end of this year, if you're a pricing professional, you should not be downloading data out of Salesforce or out of Tableau and doing analysis that way. That takes you 3 or 4 days. That should take literally minutes if it's not already automated. So I think that, as I mentioned, Rob, should be done, as well as things like what should our discount curve be, or some of those little execution-y items, for lack of a better term, where the human touch will always be needed, is really around understanding the customer, like really fundamentally understanding, talking to them, looking at the data, writing survey questions, whatever gives you that customer empathy, which then should drive your overall pricing and packaging strategy. I would suspect 3 years from now, you have to have that skill set as a human to be able to understand your end user and the needs they have.
Although I do think, like, for example, when I was at Lattice and we had launched some new pricing, we would look at the transcripts of the gong calls and actually do
Mm-hmm.
searches of any time a rep. Again, it's a human conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
being able, from a product marketing and strategy perspective, being able to analyze what was their reaction to the new pricing,
Absolutely.
and so kind of getting that sentiment and that customer feedback loop where, again, it is based on real conversations that your frontline employees are having, but being able to use AI to summarize and bring
Mm-hmm.
back, a general sentiment that this is being well received. There are specific issues with these levers or these use cases that are challenging, allows you to then iterate without having to restart.
100%, and I think Gong's a great example. We have a Gong Slack channel with with insights, etc., where every Gong call gets pushed into there, and I have a tag for any time pricing is mentioned, as well as a daily summary of it. Right, in terms of some of the new things we're doing, which gives me a sense of it. So anytime pricing is mentioned, I look at it, I read it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and like, did the rep do the right job? Was the pricing not well received, etc. And then, to your point, every day you just get, I think fundamentally you get access to the news, for lack of a better term, to what happened and what is happening much quicker. And then you can start to think about, why did that happen, what do we do about this, and what will happen, which is where our brain power should be focused.
Exactly. And let's wrap with one last question, which is, what's your best piece of advice? You have a founder or a CEO of an earlier stage company that just does not have the resources to go all in. What
Mhm.
is that starter set of steps that they need to do, the bare MVP minimum of what they need to do to set that initial pricing? I mean, especially these folks that might still be navigating, product market fit and whatnot.
Mhm.
What are the few, your 1 minute, hot seat, what they should focus on?
Absolutely. One, talk to your customers. Fundamentally, talk to. at least a dozen customers, prospects, people who fit your ICP. I consulted with a company a few years ago that was pre-launch and didn't this product didn't exist. We got on user testing. We talked to about a dozen people, gave us a hypothesis, and we went from there. We're able to get tons of insights from just a dozen people who fit the ICP. So if I were to say one thing that you can do quickly and easily and doesn't cost a lot of money, talk to your customers.
Awesome. Well, Ismail, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's like, I don't think we've solved pricing and packaging, but I think we have provided some really good direction to folks that are trying to figure out how much is art versus science versus, of course, magic is my latest.
The black arts, absolutely. And again, Rob, thank you for having me on here, giving me this platform. I love speaking with you. I love speaking on this topic. It's a fun topic, and for anyone watching, just reach out, or anyone listening, reach out. I'm always available. I can geek out on these conversations for quite some time. There's many other folks who are just wonderful, amazing pricing professionals who I'm connected with that I'd be happy to introduce you to as well. But sincerely, thank you, Rob.
Thanks so much.